The future has been redeemed, the Chronicles have been Xenobladed, and I thought it was a good opportunity to sit back and to let you, yes, you, the audience, feed me. I need to eat good. Give me these terrible, god-awful, probably criminal somewhere takes regarding Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed. And I've assembled but a handful of what some of you have been able to dredge up. And there were so many god-awful takes. This video's going to need a part 2. And that will come next week, so stay tuned. But for now, let us don our fedoras, equip our monocles, and see what you all came up with. We're going to start off with a spicy one. No joke, I may have dry heaved when I first read this one. The way I'm going to be clutching at my covers tonight, dreading the reality that we are in, the existential dread I will be engulfed in because of this take. Laura C decides to torment me with, the community should have been more like Torna. I'm trying to make it through this one. And actually meant something, or had something, locked behind completing it. Possibly keeping the ending. Oh god. Locked behind finishing it. I must ask a very simple question. When you woke up today, what made you compelled to inflict this evil upon me? What horrific sin have I brought into the world where I was deserving of this? Now, granted, I would agree that I think the community system could have had something more attached to it other than just giving AP. I kind of wish there was an appearance system here because that would have been a good thing to lock behind it. Just have a swath of appearances that you could unlock it into intermittent stages. That could have been cool. But I must disagree from the bottom of my heart with the idea of locking the main story behind it. It is by far my least favorite aspect of Torna, the Golden Country. For the first playthrough, right, I didn't mind it because I wanted to do the quest either way. But whenever I try and go back to play Torna, the Golden Country, because I'm like, oh, I really want to experience that ending in the story all over again. Hey, don't forget, you have to grind community level 4, and I'm just like, why? Why is this not optional? And they locked the best side quest, the cooking one, at level 4 by itself. So you have to do all the other ones, like helping that one little jabroni build his bug collecting machine, and then you can finally do the main story and get the ending. I'm a big advocate of player agency, and putting the ability to choose in the player's hand more often than not. And I think side content is an excellent example of something that should be relegated to optional content to let the player indulge themselves in when they feel like it at their own pace. Why create unnecessary fiction for the player when it just doesn't need to exist? Some people will want to do the side content and they won't be bothered by that all that much, which is entirely fine. However, there will be others who, maybe for whatever reason, just want to play the main story, and in my opinion, they should be able to do so. I need to regain my composure, so let's move on to JM13 roles. Take that honestly, I'm not even sure I disagree with. Panacea and Linka weren't needed. They had the most minimal impact and weren't needed. I think they're a product of the shortened time frame that the DLC operated under, because it's not going to be as long as a standard Xenoblade game. It's not going to be 100 hours. DLC, if you do a lot of side content, it's going to run you probably like 20. Some people in my community even beat the game in like 11 hours or something. And considering there were more like 1B characters instead of being like 1A main characters, they didn't have all that much going for them. And for characters that were supposed to be of equal standing to Matthew, Niall, Nikol, and Glimmer as founders, they always felt like they kind of played back up to Rex and Shulk. Like they were forced to step up into those roles as the founders because Rex and Shulk had to exit stage right at the end of the game. Which is fine. I don't think they detract from the game. I just don't think they really add all that much outside of a few cool little moments that serve as more references to the base game or games that they were in than anything. I think the birthday quest, though, was pretty cool. It was really heartwarming. Okay, this one may break some people. Daniel Nolan comes in, off rip, with Torna had better combat, better zones, a better story, and better characters. Redeem gets by on, I think that's a autocorrect mess up, on members, or like former members, to prop up a story that goes nowhere until the 11th hour, with combat broken by Rex and zones that are bland and generic. Okay. If we're talking about characters, personally, Jin and Laura was my favorite dynamic of the bunch. I think Future Redeemed had some great characters, but I don't think they were up to the quality that Jin and Laura, Malos, not necessarily Malos, but Mithra and Adam brought to the table. Perhaps it's my love of 2 overall speaking, but I think Future Redeemed has a few things going for it. One, I do prefer Future Redeemed's combat overall, and I think it's simply because I like the character switching, and Rex is a ton of fun, and I don't really get a character like that in Torna. So Rex kind of by himself carries the combat up a lot for me, and I really enjoyed the customization and the aggression system that were in Future Redeemed. I thought that was really compelling for me, personally. Zone design, like, Gormot's pretty, but it was also kind of just in Xenoblade 2, just without as many buildings or civilization. Not necessarily civilization, just you didn't have the big city formed. So Gormot was just, like, slightly different. The desert was cool in Torna. I think overall I still prefer the zone design and visuals of Future Redeemed. They were very striking and diverse. The music that accompanied them was amazing as well. I still love Aurora's Shelf at night, having that giant Sophronia tree overhanging the entire zone. Absolute chef's kiss, especially at night, where that one tree illuminated a large chunk of the zone. It created such a good and interesting visual. And my God, the ending of this game is just gorgeous. The entirety of Chapter 5, top to bottom, absolutely gorgeous piece of cinematography and zone design there. And just visuals overall. When we're talking about a better story, I don't think either Torna or Future Redeemed were quote-unquote necessary, but I don't think that's necessarily a detraction either, because I'm not a believer that a story or detail has to be necessary to add a lot of value by itself. Torna, you can play Xenoblade 2 without Torna and have a perfectly fine and enjoyable experience with it. The story of 2 is not dependent on Torna. However, what I love about Torna so much and what elevates it to one of my favorite gameplay experiences of all time is the fact of the recontextualization you get out of Torna, right? It makes Jin, Laura, Malos, Mithra, Adam, the state of the worlds. It makes all those things about 2 more interesting, more compelling, more deep and complex. It fleshes out the world itself and the history, gives reason for the reason Mithra is in 2, and also makes those really bombastic and upbeat, hopeful moments in 2 feel more worth it because of all the darkness you go through in Torna. And the ending of Torna is so freaking expertly written, in my opinion. From top to bottom, with a moment of eternity, Jin's monologue, the transition over to Rex finding Pyra, it's so good. And it makes Amalthus a slightly better villain as well, because what he affects and what he imposes upon the world resonates harder because you care more about the world and those characters that were affected by Amalthus, at least in my opinion. So, do you need Torna? No, I would argue it's not necessary. However, Torna does so much for the overall quality of 2 that I love it so much. Same kind of deal with Future Redeemed, but on a lesser scale, I'd argue. Do we need the story of the Founders? No. We don't quote-unquote need it outside of the stuff dealing with Alphys, because that stuff was pretty much never addressed in base game, and it's cool to know. And the post-credit scene could become incredibly important, depending upon where this story goes from here. However, again, as a DLC for Xenoblade 3, is it quote-unquote needed? Not necessarily. You add a lot of cool context, like Lucky 7 being composed of the party members from Xenoblade 1, at least have memories. Cool. That's a lot of really cool stuff. Is it necessary, though? I'd argue not really. Does that mean that's a criticism? Not necessarily. I think Future Redeemed brings a lot of interesting things story-wise to the table, and could retroactively become necessary depending upon where the story goes from here. And I think it's going to boil down to, at the end of the day, which game do you enjoy more, 2 or 3? Because I think the quality of Torna and Future Redeemed overall are really high up there in both regards. Though I do think actually playing the game of Future Redeemed is a more entertaining experience for me than Torna. Now, Alex Riggs over here, I don't know what I did to personally upset you, but this hurts, and I have to read this. Shulk is still a better character than Rex. Oh, the chill that went down my spine. The sweat forming on my brow right now. My knees are weak, my arms are heavy. Okay, to be serious for a moment, I love both of these characters. I would still argue I prefer Rex overall. Maybe it's because I enjoy 2 overall more, and I think the way Rex affects the rest of his party compared to Shulk is more compelling for me personally, and I enjoy the optimistic, hopeful tone and story direction that Rex had. But look, if you paid attention to my channel at any moment, you know I'm a bit of a fan of Rex as a character, so I love both of them. They're my two favorite Xenoblade protagonists, unless you count Jin. But personally, I'm gonna go with Rex here. Z Chili 7 comes in with the post-credits cutscene, either having Elma from Xenoblade X or Cosmos from Xenogears is a terrible sign for most Xenoblade fans, as I and many others have not played those games. I've played most of X, but I haven't played Gears or Saga, which is where Cosmos comes from. I appreciate the radio references and possibly connecting the stories in an insignificant way, but it would be terrible for Xenoblade 4 to link the old games that we don't have any good method of playing. I don't think that's a hot take. I do agree with this, fundamentally. It depends upon how central to the lore or the story going into the future that Saga is, and if we ever do get a port or a remake of Saga. If we do, a lot of my concerns will be alleviated. However, if we don't, I do agree that making Saga this very monumentally important piece of the lore just feels terrible if you haven't played Saga. Because there's no realistic manner of playing them. Like, do I have to go out and buy a PS2 or something, and then find scattered copies of those games, and then I can play it? No. If that's the solution to this problem, it's a trash way to go about it, in my opinion. I am kind of optimistic that we'll get something Saga-related in the future, maybe a port or a remake, whatever. I am kind of optimistic about that, but it's one of the things we'll just have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see on a lot of things, including whether or not they're going to continue expanding Saga's specific storyline, or if they're going to introduce it but explain it heavily in future games as well. They could go about that route, where you bring Cosmos in as a character necessarily, or Elma, but they explain it enough in the new games and the new stories, where you don't need that context from the previous games to really care and appreciate them as characters going forward. They could go about that route, we gotta wait and see. Gamer Rato 21 comes in with Nikol and Glimmer are by far the most disappointing part about Future Redeemed. They had such a good start, but then drop so hard in relevancy once you get all the party members. This in turn makes the moments where they are relevant feel unearned since neither of them grow as characters. Glimmer especially. It's interesting seeing a character be so distraught at the idea that they need to leave their old way of life after getting so close to homecoming. Glimmer reminds me of Lance if he became Ouroboros right before his homecoming. So I was so looking forward to seeing how she'll adjust moving forward, but then Future Redeemed skips the entire adjustment period, where she realizes how wrong their initial life was, and it just gets behind on everything the party's doing now. At least Nikol had side quests to portray his mechanical know-how, but he's just okay to me since he also lacks a character arc. Those two are the biggest reasons why I wish the DLC was longer. Yeah, I agree that it's an issue of the length of the DLC, because this is one of the reasons I say I think Future Redeemed could have easily been a fully fleshed out Xenoblade game, is because you could have taken stories like this and really added a lot of meat to them and developed them into full-blown arcs instead of the few scenes we got for them. I enjoy Nikol and Glimmer's characters. I think their story right now, what we have with Future Redeemed, is sufficient for right now. I do wish we got more with both of them, because really you have that one scene where Nikol and Glimmer have to fight Shulk and Rex to prove that they are worthy of being Ouroboros and to join them going to Prison Island, which is cool and it's a great scene for both of those characters. But then outside of Rex and Shulk walking into the light and then saying farewell to Nikol and Glimmer, they don't really contribute all that much to the ending, story-wise. I don't think they actively harm the story overall, because I do enjoy the scenes that they're in. I think Chapter 1 and 2, and even 3, do a good job of incorporating those characters and making you care about them. At least for me, I really enjoyed them. But yeah, they are one of the reasons I wish the DLC was longer overall. Emily Anvil comes in with the fact when jumping as Rex, he doesn't make his OG noises is a war crime. Now, of all the things I was paying attention to in Future Redeemed, this may not have been high on my list of priorities. However, now that I've noticed it, and we don't get to hear Chatosaurus Rex go, "Yep," I do kind of agree. 0 out of 10 game. Honestly, it's trash. Couldn't pay me to play it. But then at the same time, we do get him going, "Wee!" when he goes on Etherline. So, I mean, it's a trade-off. Elijah Leandre specifies that this is a heinous take. But one of the reasons I'm going to include it is that people commented agreeing with it. So I need to address this. Nile is an underdeveloped character. I feel like if the game was longer, we could have seen more from a backstory than child I like died, guess I'll become an avatar against my will. Again, Nile's one of those characters where I think this is a problem with the fact that the game is only like 10 to 20 hours depending on how much side content you do. They could have really fleshed her out as a character overall, because we mostly get her, or development with her, in 2 scenes outside of the flashbacks. However, I do think she's a good character regardless. Underdeveloped, sure, but she offers an interesting perspective on the state of the world of something like Ionios, where a world that's caught perpetually in war is going to have trauma and sacrifices, not necessarily sacrifices, but losses. And people are naturally going to become disillusioned with the state of the human condition, and become disillusioned with humanity as a whole, like Nikol was, realizing that her ideal world was just not meant to be in a place like Ionios. Like she says, at the end of the day, people always kill people. And when she made that connection, when she made that realization, she gladly sided up with Alpha. Now, these next 2 are kind of similar, so I'm just going to address them both at the same time. We have Eric Reed saying, as much as I love Xenoblade 1, I wish they used the Bionis head as a zone to traverse, or anything aside from a majority of what's considered Bionis' leg. Xenoblade 2 got pushed to the side with only a few notable landmarks, all pertaining to Tantal, and the stairs from the cliffs of Mortha. They could have gone all out with more scenery. Joey Straight also brings up, man, screw Xenoblade 2 fans, I hate those guys, cope and seethe bozos. Said Takahashi as he cooked up the most phenomenal Xenoblade 1 fanstuff as possible. And to reply to both of you, I would simply reply with Rex. Because they made Shulk basically do no damage, barely be able to hold aggro, and die to a stiff wind. Whereas Rex does get knocked over by a stiff wind, but he's gonna bring down the entire neighborhood with him. And while I don't necessarily agree with a lot of people that say the base game of Xenoblade 3 was heavily leaning towards Xenoblade 2 aesthetics, I do agree that they lean a little bit more towards them in important areas than 1, so it's a bit of a trade-off for me. Honestly, I don't mind because I really like the world that we got with Future Redeemed. And again, we got Chad Rex. Chadosaurus, yeah? Now, one last take remains. Super Saiyan Crap Goku comes in with, man, Mithra got screwed over so hard in 3. Glimmer and Mio get to have an essential role in the story, meanwhile Mithra's kid doesn't even get acknowledged once as even a concept here. I understand why people feel this way, and I think one of the reasons why I'm kind of here or there on it is because, personally, I'm fine if Mithra's kid just never gets addressed. I'd rather them go unaddressed than have a story that's not really good surrounding them as a character. If they have a story to tell with Mithra's kid, cool. If they don't, I'm fine either way. However, I would also follow up with, I don't think we've seen the last of these characters. I mean, hell, if y'all really want confirmation, go rewatch the ending of Xenoblade 3 and count the number of times they say something along the lines of, we'll see each other again, and then look at Rex's final dialogue to Glimmer before he leaves, to go become the Avatar. And with the way that the post-credit scenes of both 3 and Future Redeemed are structured, I think we'll see these characters again in some capacity, and they may be saving Mithra's kid for a story like that in the future. I could see it happen. At the same time, I don't want like the next generation of Xenoblade to be just defined by, oh yeah, these are the kids from the original casts. I'm fine with bringing in new characters and new stuff like that, but again, it's one of those things where we just have to wait and see. I still think a lot. Also, I do kind of hope that we see these characters again, especially Noah and Mio, to deal with the aftermath of Future Redeemed's post-credit scene. I don't think their stories are over. I never got that vibe from Xenoblade 3, and I still don't after Future Redeemed. And one of the things for me especially, I'm going to talk about this in a future theory video, Future Redeemed felt like they were introducing characters so that they can flesh them out a lot in the future. Not necessarily flesh them out a lot, or at least reintroduce them in the future. I don't know how big of a story impact they'll have necessarily, but I don't think we've seen the last of these characters. But hey, we're just going to have to wait and see. So I'm going to call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And hit the bell icon to be notified when I upload in the future. Stay safe. Have a great day. Go play some video games if you can. And as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.